Just a
Speaking of
supercut.
crazy, speaking of deranged.
Okay, speaking of deranged.
Yeah.
On Wednesday, the Department of Homeland Security
Speaking of billions.
announced a Disinformation Governance Board. Disinformation Governance Board. According to the announcement, the board will immediately begin focusing on misinformation aimed at migrants at the U.S.-Mexican border. The board will be led by disinformation expert Nina Jankowicz. He has researched Russian misinformation tactics and online harassment. This is also the woman who sings show tunes on TikTok.
JKL, I
about
feel like
fighting disinformation.
You should be running our disinformation board. You always have such a strong opinion, and you have such a nose for what's BS and what's not.
Here's what's going on here. So first of all, this woman claims to be an expert in disinformation. Let's evaluate that claim. She was an active pusher of the Steele dossier, which it turns out is disinformation for which people are now under indictment. She also was active in trying to censor the Hunter Biden laptop story, which, as it now turns out, was not disinformation. It was absolutely true, as acknowledged by the New York Times and the Washington Post. You would think that these blemishes on her record might disqualify her from being an expert on disinformation, but actually, in the view of the people who are hiring her, these are actually qualifications because they are not interested in the truth. The reason this department is set up and what they mean by disinformation is they have hired her to push partisan political points. That's what's going on here. That's what disinformation is. Now, it used to be that if you disagreed with somebody, you would just say, listen, I disagree with you, or maybe you're an idiot, whatever, you're wrong. But now the way that these debates are set up and the way they work is they don't just say you're wrong or that's not true. They try to label you as disinformation so you can get you censored. And the point of hiring this disinformation czar is basically to censor basically to shut down the debate. That is basically the whole point of the censorship.
Do you think there's any timing here with Elon buying
Yes,
Twitter?
of course. There was a great tweet about this.
I mean, I love conspiracy sacks, by the way.
Well, I don't think it's conspiracy theory. There was a great tweet about this that we live in a future where it's like a mashup of George Orwell and Ayn Rand. Because here you have, Elon Musk, the heroic lone entrepreneur trying to rescue freedom of speech. At the same time, you have this Orwellian Ministry of Truth being created by the federal government. So, I mean,
no awareness of naming. Yeah.
It's just bizarre. But the disturbing thing about it is
Disinformation Governance Board is such a dystopian name.
The thing about it that's a little bit scary here, I know you play the video of her doing show tunes and it seems sort of silly, but the thing that's scary is that this is under the Homeland Security Department.
That's another weird wrinkle. Why is that there?
Yeah. It's the most militarized department in our government. So it's really scary to put the Ministry of Truth under the department that has all the soldiers and all the weapons. Ministry of
Truth is not the name of it, but it's close.
Pretty darn close. Now, why is it there? I'll tell you why. Because this was built up to. There was a
Ministry of Truth. Shout out George Orwell.
A couple of months ago, there's a news story that we might have covered on this pod, where the Homeland Security Department redefined disinformation to comprise. They said it represented an escalation of the terror threat level. So in other words, they basically said that disinformation was tantamount to terrorism. Remember that? Didn't we talk about that? This is the payoff to that. First, they basically define the other side as being disinformation of the debate as being disinformation. Then they define disinformation as basically terrorism. Then they have the Homeland Security Department, which is supposed to be responsible for terrorism, create this Ministry of Truth. This is what's going on here.
It's really weird.
Just to remind everyone, there was concern in the last election. I'm going to play devil's advocate, as I often find myself doing here. Okay. That just to try and explain the world. That's the reason I often play this role, because I'm trying to understand the world. But there was a real concern that the Russian government was using information warfare and propaganda through social media to influence voting, and that is considered a security threat to the integrity of our elections. Therefore, this is a Homeland Security issue, and there is a question mark, of course, that everyone has on how far are they going to go once you set this precedent. When would they ever stop in terms of quote unquote policing information and policing what's true and managing internal propaganda and internal media delivered to us by the government? That's the other side of the coin. But the primary side of the coin, the initial side, the initial representation that I think folks do have concerns around is how do we keep foreign actors from creating misinformation campaigns that go viral and influence elections. And Sacks, I don't know if you think that that's a concern we should or shouldn't have, but how would you address it if you were the president and that was the challenge, to like, how do we stop that from happening?
Foreign actors interfering in our elections is certainly a concern we should have if it was actually happening on a big scale or in a meaningful way.
This is basically
a hoax, okay? John Durham is basically out there making indictments right now proving the extent of this hoax. It started with the whole Steele dossier, which was a piece of campaign opposition research that was manufactured by Hillary Clinton's campaign. The lawyers who basically produced it are under indictment. And that's where this whole thing of Russian disinformation came from. And the only proof for that thesis is that supposedly the Russians bought $100,000 of Facebook ads on Facebook. So I'm not denying that that occurred, but it was relatively minor. It was a drop in the bucket of all the activity going on around the last election.
To be clear, that was just the ads that were bought with like credit cards that said like FSB on it. Like, but
way to go, Facebook security team.
You probably didn't count all the number of credit cards that were stolen. I'm pretty sure the Russians are capable of stealing John Smith's credit card and using that to buy ads as well.
Well, I looked at those ads. You've seen those ads. They were ludicrous. They weren't going to convince anybody of anything. I mean, they had like Jesus and the devil arm wrestling each other, and the Jesus figure was basically set, and it was just absurd. I mean, the Jesus figure was saying that.
Okay, but to be clear, it happened, and you've now stepped back your position on like it just wasn't at scale, to your opinion.
I think. Look, the scale interference in the election was committed by big tech. I mean, they censored the Hunter Biden story 2 weeks before the election. It turns out that's a completely true story. That Hunter Biden has extensive business dealings in Ukraine, the country we are now.
Yes,
but we are now deeply involved in a war there. And that story, the electorate had the right to take that into account. Big tech censored that story. So look,
there was a reason for that. May I respond to that? To give people like making a very difficult decision, you have to remember Trump asked Putin on stage to hack Hillary's emails, and they did. Then he asked the Ukraine to take action against the Bidens, or he wouldn't give them support. He was impeached for that. So if you put yourself in and I'm not saying Twitter made the right decision here, but there was also sexual material, people's nudes, and hacked material and nudes are against the terms of service. So I think two things happened concurrently. One, listen, the people working at Twitter are 98% liberal. They don't want Trump. They saw it as an existential threat. And then two, they don't want to link to hacked material.
Oh, really? Well, hold on a second. Hold on. During the whole Canadian trucker... Wait, let me finish this point.
I have to finish my point. The third point, and then I'll let you go, is that in addition to all that, Hunter Biden is completely a grifter. Go.
Okay. I agree with you on that one.
Yeah.
So, look, during the whole Canadian trucker thing, remember when all the people who contributed to those Canadian truckers, they got doxxed. I mean, basically, there was a hacker who leaked all the people who had donated, and social networks were happy to print all that information. So this idea that they censor hacked information is nonsense. The Libs of TikTok account just got doxxed by Taylor Lorenz. Look, whether you think that was a good idea or not, the point is these principles are invoked very selectively when there's a story they want to suppress. And the New York Times and the Washington Post have both not come out and said that the laptop was real. It's been authenticated. The story was real. And this whole idea that it was disinformation, that was just invented. I mean, it was just invented.
Well, no, hacked. It wasn't that it was disinformation. It was that it was potentially hacked. And Trump.
Nothing was hacked.
Here's the thing. Trump set the stage for that. And the people at Twitter and Facebook who also made these decisions, they were informed by three-letter agencies, Department of Justice and FBI, et cetera. Hey, this is potentially hack material designed to interfere with the election.
Listen,
it also is true that Biden is a grifter.
Nina Jankowicz and other Democratic Party operatives just made up out of whole cloth that the Hunter Biden story was disinformation. It was true. It's been acknowledged as true. The Washington Post says it's true.
Well, I mean, I think
the New York Times says it's true. So hold on. So it goes to my point.
Social media can improve.
No, it's not about improving it. Look.
Well, no, you didn't hear my sentence. I think this is where social media can improve, which is if they had to explain every one of these decisions they make in full, in transparency, I think that's something Elon could bring to this party, which is if you're going to block something, we need to know why. And they'd never explain why and who made the decision. And I think that transparency would benefit situations like this. If the DOJ or FBI told them, hey, listen, this is hacked material, then they got to go to the DOJ and FBI and say, hey, you got to give us cover here. If this is in fact hack material, you told us not to print it, we're not going to print it. But it was just bizarre that one publication got dinged like the New York Post. It didn't.
The oldest newspaper in America. The oldest newspaper in America.
Also not the bastion of like.
It doesn't matter. That's not for you to
journalism.
decide. It's not for Twitter to decide. It's a legitimate publication that had a true story.
And I don't disagree.
And it
with
was relevant to the election, and the American people should have been able to take that into account. And people like Nina Jankowicz or whatever, our new czar of the Ministry of Truth, she was out in the forefront, basically calling that story disinformation. Meanwhile, she's pushing the Steele dossier, which really was.
You think if that story was confirmed, would Biden have won?
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. But the point is that it shouldn't have been suppressed. That was election interference. Now, Elon came out this week and specifically tweeted that was basically a mistake.
Bad call. That Jack also said it was a bad call.
Jack said it was a mistake too, and Elon repeated the same thing, that they shouldn't have done that.
I think everybody can agree it's a bad call in hindsight. Yeah,
of course, but
in hindsight,
right? But what was the reaction to what Elon said? He was accused by virtue of criticizing the policy decision that Twitter made, that was supposedly targeted harassment of the legal counsel at Twitter who made the decision, who gets paid $17 million a year to make those decisions. Did you guys see this debate? This happened last year, this last week. So the point is that if you criticize somebody who's on a certain side of the debate, that's harassment. But he didn't even mention her by name. This is how absurd this discourse has got.